la 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 la. How often do we do that to God, where He's trying to tell us something and we're just not listening? We cover our ears, and it's not that we're just not listening, it's not we don't want to hear it. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about Acts chapter 7, specifically, and talking about Stephen and some of his final moments that he has before he is persecuted for something that he believes. See, it's in Acts chapter 7, verse 54, that starts the beginning of how angry the Jewish leadership was. See, the reason that Stephen was in leadership was because the church was expanding. It said that they were growing by the thousands daily. And with any big expansion, whether it be a business or, in this particular case, the church was beginning to have some problems after the apostles were taking on the church and what they wanted to do with Jesus. So they were having some cash flow problems. They were having some leadership problems. There was so many people, and they decided that they needed more leadership. So they took Stephen as one of 7. And so when they took Stephen, Stephen began to preach, and he taught the things that he believed. He taught about Jesus, and this caught the ear of the Jewish council. It caught the ear of Jewish leaders. And from that point, they had a moment where they come up with these lies about Stephen, and he's in front of them, and he goes back, and he tells the Jewish leaders about how it was the Jewish people that persecuted prophets. He talked about Moses, and as he talked about these things, as he talked about the prophets and he talked about the Jewish people, it made the Jewish leadership angry. In that verse of Acts 7:54, it says, when they heard this, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Look, he said, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. What a slap in the face for Stephen to give the Jewish council, who refused to believe that Jesus was the Son of God and still Son of Man. It was Stephen who looks up and has this prophetic moment after just talking about prophets, who has this prophetic moment and tells the Jewish council that I see heaven right now, and at the right hand of God is Jesus. It's at this moment that the Jewish leaders reacted how I did at the beginning of this video. Verse 57 says, at this they covered their ears, and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him. They covered their ears. They did not want to listen to what Stephen had to say. And sometimes we don't want to listen to the things that we know that we need to hear. I remember a moment when I was a student in high school. I was going to my final CIY move, a trip that our own students are getting ready to go to in just the next couple of weeks. And at that moment, I sat shotgun to my youth pastor, Scott, and on the road, I was telling him all of the reasons I wanted to leave a call that I had years before, to leave the call to ministry. And I tried to tell him it was because I wasn't good enough. It was because I didn't listen to the right music, because I didn't want to listen to worship music when I was in high school. It was because I didn't think I would be a good role model. It was because I just thought that maybe it wasn't practical enough. Maybe if I just went into business or went into culinary and did something like that, then my life would be better. But that's not the call that God gave me years before that I had heard. And at this point, when I'm being told and when I'm being pushed to do what I need to do, I was covering my ears and I was screaming at the top of my lungs, and I didn't want to hear it. The Jewish leadership to Stephen didn't want to hear it. What I want to talk about and what I want to encourage you is to listen. Not just to hear, but to listen to the things that God might be pulling you to or pushing you to. There's so often that we try to block out the things that are uncomfortable. So, as we look at Stephen, a man who was so passionate in the leadership of this church, who was passionate about Jesus, who knew in his moments that upon him saying this, and the moment that they rushed him, he knew he was going to die, and he was going to get stoned, and he did. But in all of that, what is it that God is trying to tell you? What would have happened if the Jewish leadership would have understood and listened to what Stephen had to say? We're never going to know. But you and I, we have this opportunity every day to listen to what God has to say without covering our ears and shouting at the top of our lungs. So as we go through this week, in your meditation, in your devo, in your prayer, maybe just as you're reading Acts chapter 7 and 8 this week, I want you to pray and I want you to be quiet. I want you to take moments of your day to listen and do nothing else. And hear and listen what God is telling you or pushing you to do. Thank you.